My name is Davis, and I was 31 years old when this happened, working long hours as a truck driver across the western United States. I had been driving professionally for almost 8 years, and during that time, I grew comfortable with solitude. Long roads, endless stretches of land, and nights when I might not see another person for hours. It was all part of the job. Some drivers hated the silence, but for me, it became a strange kind of peace. The hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of wheels on the highway often felt like a lullaby that kept me company. But the desert at night was different. I had crossed many landscapes, forests, mountains, plains, but the desert carried a silence that was not peaceful at all. It was heavy, vast, and ancient, like the land itself was holding its breath. The stars burned brighter than anywhere else, and the emptiness seemed endless, stretching so far that even time felt longer out there. On most nights, I managed to ignore the feeling, but the night of the story was not like most. It was the summer of 2015, and I was hauling building supplies from Nevada into Arizona. I started my route late in the evening, and by the time the sun disappeared, I had already been driving for several hours. I knew that stretch of desert road was lonely, but I reminded myself that I had driven worse. Still, as midnight passed and the clock crept closer to 2 in the morning, I realized I had not seen another vehicle in over an hour. No headlights, no taillights, no sign of life at all. Just a long strip of asphalt cutting through sand and stone, with darkness pressing hard on both sides. My radio had lost its signal. My cell phone showed no bars. Even the air felt different, thicker, almost pressing against the windows as I moved forward. I tried to comfort myself with small habits, sipping from a bottle of water, adjusting the mirror, checking my gauges. But every action only reminded me of how alone I was. That was when I saw it. Far ahead, on the edge of my headlights, something moved along the shoulder of the road. At first, I thought it might be a person, maybe someone stranded in the middle of nowhere. I slowed the truck slightly, my eyes narrowing as the headlights stretched further toward it. The figure was pale against the dark, but as I got closer, my breath caught in my throat. It was not walking like a human should. Its limbs were far too long, bending at angles that made no sense, joints jerking unnaturally as if they had forgotten how to function. Its head tilted forward, hanging low, almost dragging toward its chest. The arms reached down too far, almost brushing the ground with each twitching step. I gripped the wheel tighter and slowed even more, staring in disbelief. As the lights washed over it, the figure did not turn toward me. It did not wave or ask for help. It simply twitched and staggered along the road's edge like some broken puppet, trying to imitate life. The pale skin seemed almost gray, stretched too tightly over its thin frame. I felt the air in my lungs grow heavy. Something deep inside me screamed that I should not stop. I pressed the gas again, moving past it quickly, but my eyes betrayed me. I looked into the side mirror. That was when my heart seemed to stop. The figure was no longer staggering along the shoulder. It was standing in the middle of the road, perfectly still now, turned directly toward my truck as I drove away. My hands began to sweat on the wheel. The road stretched endlessly ahead of me, a ribbon of black asphalt swallowed by desert night. I tried to calm myself, telling myself I was tired, that maybe my eyes had played tricks on me. But deep down, I knew what I had seen was real. Minutes passed, the truck roaring forward into emptiness. Then, without warning, I felt a heavy jolt from behind. The entire truck shook, as if something massive had struck the back of the trailer. I gasped and slammed my foot down harder, speedometer climbing. My first thought was that the trailer had hit something on the road, but the desert highway was flat and empty. I had seen no debris, no obstacles. I checked my mirrors again, my heart hammering. There was nothing behind me, just the black ribbon of road disappearing into silence. Yet the impact had been real. I could still feel the echo of it in my bones. I drove faster, the engine groaning as I pushed the truck harder than usual. The miles stretched longer than they should have, every shadow on the road twisting into shapes I did not want to recognize. My eyes flicked to the mirrors again and again, half expecting to see the figure clinging to the back of my trailer. But there was nothing, only emptiness. It took nearly 40 more miles before I reached the next rest stop. The lights of the station glowed faintly against the dark, and relief flooded through me as I pulled in. I parked the truck and stepped out, my legs shaking beneath me. The desert air felt colder now, biting against my skin as I circled the trailer with my flashlight. At first, everything looked normal. No dents, no broken parts, no sign of damage from the impact I had felt. But then I reached the back door. The layer of dust that always collected there during long drives had been disturbed. Across the surface, long streaks dragged downward, like fingers, or something shaped like fingers, had scraped against it. There were too many lines, stretched too long to be human. The marks looked as though a hand with far too many digits had dragged itself across the back of my truck. I froze there, staring, my breath clouding in the desert night. Every sound around me felt sharper, from the buzzing of a light overhead to the distant hum of insects in the sand. But underneath it all, I felt something heavier, a presence. I got back into the truck as quickly as I could and locked the doors. I did not leave that rest stop until the sky began to lighten with the first signs of dawn. I finished the delivery, but I told no one. What could I say? That something pale and broken had followed me through the desert? That something had touched my truck with hands that did not belong to any human being? Other drivers told stories sometimes, phantom hitchhikers, strange lights, shapes that appeared in the sand and disappeared when you got close. I had laughed at those tales before, but after that night, I no longer laughed. Even now, when I cross the desert at night, I cannot help but watch the edges of the road too carefully. Every shadow becomes a warning. Every pale shape in the distance makes my heart stop. And sometimes, when the night is still enough, I swear I feel that same heavy jolt against the back of the trailer again, as if something unseen is reminding me that it is still out there, waiting for another driver to pass through its endless highway. I was 24 years old when I made the decision to escape the city and spend a quiet week in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. At that time of my life, I was exhausted in ways I could not explain to anyone. I worked in a crowded office where the noise never truly stopped, not even when the workday ended. Phones buzzed, conversations overlapped, traffic roared outside the windows, and my own thoughts seemed to scatter in every direction until I could no longer hear myself clearly. The idea of silence began to feel like a dream, something rare and precious that I needed more than anything else. I had grown up in small towns, but it had been years since I had been away from the rush of city life. When a co-worker mentioned a cabin he once stayed in while traveling through the Smokies, something inside me clicked. I searched for it that same evening, and after a few calls, I booked it for the following week. It was supposed to be a simple retreat, a week of nature, stillness, and time away from people. The cabin stood far from the nearest road, hidden behind thick forest slopes. Reaching it required driving along narrow mountain paths, then walking a steep trail until the roof appeared between the trees. When I finally stood in front of it, the wooden walls looked strong but weathered, and the air around it felt old. There was no phone service, no internet, and the only connection I had to the outside world was a landline in case of emergency. I carried food, a journal, a flashlight, a map, and my determination to rest. The first day felt exactly as I had hoped. The air smelled sharp and fresh, carrying the smoke of leaves turning dry in October. The forest stretched endlessly, with trees so tall and close together that the sky looked smaller than I remembered. During the day, the silence was gentle, broken only by the sound of birds or the faint rushing of water from a creek somewhere down the slope. At night, the silence thickened. It pressed against the cabin walls until the beating of my own heart felt louder than it should. But I told myself this was what I wanted. Real quiet, real distance, a a space where I could breathe without the world pulling at me. On the second day, I walked along a nearby trail. The ground was soft with fallen leaves, and every step I took sent a crisp sound rising into the trees. The deeper I went, the more I noticed how quickly the forest swallowed sound. My own movements echoed strangely, as if the trees themselves held the noise and refused to let it travel. After about an hour, I began noticing odd marks carved into some trunks. They were not initials or symbols made by people for fun. They looked more like slashes, long and uneven, running both low to the ground and high above where my head reached. Some of the marks had a pattern, like claws dragged with purpose. I paused several times to look closer, but I convinced myself they must have been made by animals. Bears, maybe. The Smokies were known for them, and though I had not seen any yet, I knew they were out there. Still, the marks unsettled me enough to turn back sooner than I had planned. That evening, I cooked a simple meal and wrote in my journal by the light of a small lamp. The cabin creaked with the weight of the wind outside, but when the air stilled, the silence felt even heavier. As I stared out the window into the blackness between the trees, I had the strange impression that the forest was staring back. The sensation stayed with me until I closed the curtain, as if covering the glass would make the feeling go away. On the third night, something shifted. I was sitting by the window again, writing in my journal, when I realized the wind had stopped completely. The stillness that followed was unnatural, a kind of silence so deep it made my skin crawl. Then I noticed movement among the trees. At first, I thought it was nothing more than shadows, or my eyes adjusting poorly in the lamplight. But slowly, the shape became clearer. It stood taller than a person, thinner than a tree, too still for an animal. My chest tightened. I blinked several times, but the shape remained where it was, not moving, not swaying with the branches, only standing and watching. I dropped my pen and pulled the curtain closed, but the weight of its presence stayed. Moments later, I heard the sound of leaves crunching outside, slow and careful. The steps circled the cabin once, deliberate and patient, pausing at corners as if the thing outside knew exactly where I was inside. My throat felt dry as I tried to breathe quietly, afraid even the smallest sound would give me away. I sat frozen in my chair for what felt like hours, listening until the sound finally faded into the forest again. In the morning, I found proof that what I had heard was real. On the wooden steps leading to the porch, fresh mud prints stretched across the boards. They were not shaped like boots, and they were not shaped like paws either. They looked hand-like, with long finger-shaped lines, too many to be natural, pressed deep into the wood as if whatever made them carried unusual weight. I stared at them until my skin prickled, then quickly packed some things into a bag in case I needed to leave. But when nothing happened during the day, I convinced myself I could stay one more night. That night was worse, much worse. The sound came again, circling, scratching faintly against the walls, tapping at the window frame. The thing outside no longer seemed cautious. It seemed curious, testing the cabin, testing me. My flashlight sat in my lap, my hand gripping it tightly, though I never turned it on. I felt that if I shone it outside, I might see something I could never forget. Hours dragged until the sound stopped again, but by then I was too shaken to sleep. The fourth night was unbearable. I had not slept properly in 2 days, and my mind felt thin, stretched by fear and exhaustion. I sat in the corner of the room, hugging my knees, waiting. This time, the sound came earlier, as soon as the forest grew dark. The steps pressed against the porch with a weight that made the wood groan. Something scraped against the door, long strokes that left a deep vibration through the cabin floor. Then silence, followed by a single heavy knock that rattled the frame. My chest tightened until I thought my ribs might snap. The door did not open, but the knock echoed in my head for hours afterward. At dawn, I left. I did not even finish packing everything, just enough to carry with me as I walked quickly down the trail toward the mountain road. I did not look back once. My breath stayed shallow until I reached my car, and even then, the forest felt like it was watching me leave. Later that day, I stopped at a gas station near town. When I mentioned the cabin, the old man at the counter studied me quietly. He said little, Only that not many people stayed there for long. Some lasted a week, some less. He gave me a knowing look, as if he already understood what I had experienced. Even now, years later, when I close my eyes in a quiet room, I sometimes hear the slow crunch of steps circling me. I cannot explain what lived in those woods or why it chose to watch me, but I know the silence of that place never truly left me. It waits in the back of my memory, heavy and patient, just like it did on those nights in the Smoky Mountains.